It's the end of the year. You have many meetings, get together with people, you're sending out messages, and sometimes you get no response. Either you get no response where you say, okay, said something very important, no one actually took care, or you send an email, you say, hmm, no answer. The question is, do you have a right to get an answer? And that's our topic of today, because many people texted me about how frustrated they are when their leaders do not answer whatever they ask them for. And that is an important point, because as soon as you don't get an answer, this is, of course, frustrating for the moment. The question is, do you really have a right to get an answer when it comes to leadership work? So when we talk about the right to get an answer, it's always very important that usually the very start of it is an extreme answer to the one or to the other side. You find, especially on platforms such as Instagram or on LinkedIn, where people with absolutely no leadership credentials love to talk about leadership. Usually, they say one of the two. They either say, "Yeah, you look, people must answer. They just have to. Leaders have to answer absolutely anything. It's all about the people, you know." You have to answer anything. It's your job. It's an obligation. You must give an answer. That's the one extreme. And of course, in that extreme, that's wrong. However, the other extreme usually is, yeah, you look, you are very busy. You're a very busy professional. So things just can't slip through. And they absolutely have no right that you answer. You can say something, or maybe you just delete the email. It's also okay. You have all right to do that, so you don't have to answer. And that is, of course, another problematic answer, because both of these extremes do not lead to any kind of suitable, sustainable solution where people are actually happy with what is happening right there. So now we have to talk about, do you actually have a right to answer? And of course, we know situations where this happens. The typical solution is the first typical situation is you write an email, you text an email, send someone an email, no answer. When you have an answer, and you probably have an answer in mind, you even suggested something, however, the other side just didn't respond to that, not at all. Or you're sitting in a meeting and suddenly in a discussion you say, hey, we could do X, Y, Z. And the answer is, yeah, good point. I get back to you. And you immediately wonder, when and where will you tell me? And on which channel will you communicate? But also, you might think, yeah, one of these answers, which usually mean there's nothing happening. So when you are in meetings, you have discussions. Often people are frustrated that their leaders sit there and they say something like, yeah, I get back to you. And then a couple of things on top of that. Yeah, I get back to you. I really appreciate the idea. I mean, I see you and I hear you. I see you and I hear you. We will we will check, and I get back to you on that. And nothing happens afterwards. That, of course, is not great. However, it is simply more complicated and also more complex than just saying it's either the one or the other. And now we have to talk about, how do these things really work. The first aspect that we have here is, you need to see, when you talk about an issue, is the issue complicated? And we need to define that, because many people mix it up with something else. So let's say, for example, you want to talk about combustion engines. You want to have a combustion engine explained, and that's complicated, no question about that. Complicated means you really have to put effort into that to understand what's going on there. However, complicated, and that's the good news here, complicated can be explained. It always can be. It takes time, it takes effort from both sides, probably from your side. When you're working on your own, even more. If you have external help, it probably takes a bit less time. But complicated means it can be understood in one way or the other, as long as you put in the effort. However, if I now say, let's say you are a leader and we talk about combustion engines, and I talk to you and say, look, I have an idea. You know combustion engines, and you know that we have e-mobility. I think we should go. I really think we should just switch the whole thing to hydrogen power, and please also go to politics and tell them that they need to promote this. They need to say we move away from e-mobility. We all go to hydrogen. That must be the flavor of the month and the year and the decade that the government does that. Are you able to do that? And then probably people who are qualified say, that's rather complex, because it is. Complicated means you can read yourself into it, and sooner or later you're going to understand that. Math is complicated, and when you really put in the effort, you sooner or later, you might not still like it, but you will sooner or later say, yeah, I think I got that. Don't see the point in it, maybe, when it comes to math. And I can tell you, math is important to understand complicated things. However, complicated you can read yourself into. Complex means there is something out there, because often when it comes, for example, to politics and how to drive cars in the future, people will say, look, there are politics, there are different parties, there are elections coming up. We don't know who's the next party. We have certain polls and tendencies. However, we don't really know who's the next one. So we really have to see and we have to balance out where do we position ourselves. So it's rather complex. And that's exactly the point here. As soon as you're sitting there and in a complex situation where you know that people have to talk to other levels, other departments, go up the hierarchy, go up to the board, present there, get commitment, get management commitment, whatnot else. And when you then ask for a quick yes, no, you are the unreasonable one. Complex means something is out there which is beyond your control, but which is highly relevant. So, for example, when it comes to how to power cars in the future, the support of the government of a certain technology is absolutely crucial because they will set the sail or not set the sail in a certain direction or the other in your favor or against your favor. And that is something you need to know. And in addition to that, of the issue being either complicated or complex, on top of that, you have to see, is it important and is it urgent? I just give you an example. I sat in a meeting and there was one person very passionately speaking about how important it will be to have more plants in the office. And we all agree that this is a point, especially when you work in a financial industry where probably some of the offices are, let's say, a bit sparse, depending on where you work. And there is scientific evidence how good plants are for the atmosphere, or you want to have a dog in the office, or whatever else. However, when people now say, "Look, we just have a merger going on. We are just talking with XYZ about integrating their company into ours, which is now ongoing." We really can talk about that later because we are a 42 stories high building, and just putting plants in there is just not the whole story. You have to talk to safety and security. What about the fire hazard risk? Who's taking care of the plants? What about any kind of insect that might come in? What about any kind of allergies that might be there? There are lots of things to discuss. Probably not immediately complex, but complicated. Also, when you suddenly talk about what about the allergies? Okay, we just make a list. So you want to have your medical records with your employer? And suddenly it gets complex because that's also a personal aspect of work. People probably will say, I don't want my personal records being somewhere with my employer in an Excel file, which is also not GDPR compliant, by the way. So it might be that you have a complicated and complex issue, and something else is more important, is more urgent, or both. And then it takes time. And the question now is, how do we implement what we just talked about in your organization without getting overly frustrated? And number one is ground rules. And here, by the way, public office is usually set up better than free enterprise. When you, for example, want to have an answer from public office, when you're in politics and the other party asks you a question, you have to answer. When the Prime Minister in the UK has Prime Minister's question time and someone asks a question, the Prime Minister can't stand there and say, yeah, I'm not going to answer that. Yeah, I'm not going to say anything on that one. No, thank you. I just pass. Thank you. No, bad question. Thank you. No, no, thank you. That's just not possible. There are ground rules. Also, there is a Freedom of Information Act where you can ask certain public offices and public entities about certain aspects, and they must give you an answer. However, in free enterprise, we often do not have these rules, or very, very few of them in place, and that sometimes becomes the issue. So you need to be aware that this needs to be taken care of. And of course, I don't like that immediately a new piece of regulation is put up. However, having some regulation in there where you say when someone puts up a reasonable aspect, when they have, for example, a business case, when they put everything in writing, and when they hand it to you as a leader, an answer within 48 hours as a first reaction and 10 days as the next reaction is reasonable and should be what we can expect from our leaders, because people need to know, when do I deal with something which is complicated, complex, and how do I handle importance and urgency? That is just situative leadership. Some people say situational leadership. Situative leadership, situational leadership is a skill that you must have learned. If you didn't learn it, it is time to learn it right now. And by the way, no one should be a leader without knowing about this theory and how to apply it in practice. So very important is take care of this, because anything else will fall apart when you simply tell people, yeah, I get back to you. And you never do, because you thought, yeah, my boss did that with me, and I think this is just how things go. No, this is not how things go. This is just bad leadership. And in addition to that, and now we come to a very important point, sometimes the organization might be the issue. Sometimes your boss might be the issue. And sometimes the issue is you. You. Because there are people who, with every meeting, They always pretend they're very engaged, but what they really are is they sit there and they actually think, I think in this organization many people should change. I mean, not me, obviously. So I always have these 48 ideas with having zero skin in the game, and of course I have zero task out of them. I just throw them on the table and I expect people then to change it, and probably I get a bit of bonus for that. And when they don't do it, I'm going to pretend I'm super offended by it because I bring ideas and you just don't listen to me. When you become that person lacking that self reflection, then the issue is with you. The last aspect here is self reflection. Think of, and that is something which I learned from a great friend who lives in central London, who gave me that amazing phrase, is it a hill worth dying on? Is your idea so important that you say, I'm going to escalate this non answered email? I'm going to escalate my non answered question. I'm going to escalate my non answered meeting request. I'm going to escalate this to the next level. Is it that important? If so, go for it. And then you probably will be a very engaged employee, a very successful manager and leader in the future when you pick the right battle. However, if you pick every battle because you think everything's important and you think you don't care about complicated, they need to master that. You don't care about complex, it's their job to deal with that very quickly. Everything you say is important, everything you say is urgent. That's a clear lack of self reflection. So be sure that you have the self reflection in place, because only with that self reflection you will be able to deliver on the promise that people expect from you. And this promise is simply reasonable picks in reasonable moments, sorted into categories complicated, complex, in addition to impact, of course, impact, but also importance and urgency. And when they see that you understand all of that and then you make a request, then they will consider this reasonable and everything will get better from here when you do it exactly the way we just discussed. And I wish you all the best implementing that in your organization and your personal work life. And when you now say, I think I have about 48 aspects to discuss here. Let's go for it. So feel free to, of course, so first, when you listen to me or you watch me on YouTube right now, feel free to leave a like here, subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much for doing so. Feel free to leave a comment. I'm always happy to see them. Feel free also to go on Apple Podcasts or Spotify when you're listening there. Feel free to leave 5 stars. Thank you very much for doing so as well. And recommend this podcast and videocast amongst your friends, colleagues, anywhere you like. Share it on social media. Thank you very much for that. An additional resource we have are the leadership tips, only available on YouTube Short. So it pays off to set the little bell on YouTube so you get a tiny notification when something new comes out there. We have more than 100 leadership tips out there already, and they're growing week by week. Every week we put a couple of them out there. And of course, you can also follow me on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or go to my website, nb-networks.biz. When you now want to text me something, but you don't want to have it in the comment section because it's probably too confidential. And today's episode actually happened due to emails which I arrived in my inbox. Text me nb@nb-networks.com. When you send me an email there, it's 100% confidential. Of course, we will just have an exchange. It's not going to be mentioned on the podcast. We just have an exchange. And of course, I'm very happy to answer all of your aspects that you still have there. If you now think, are there live sessions? Yes, there are. expert.nb-networks.com. When you go to that place and you put your email address in there, you only receive one email every Wednesday morning. And very important here, you have full access to all the articles in the leadership letter. No paywall. In other places, you have paywalls. Not there. Full access to all the podcasts. By the way, they are in English and German language, so they are available bilingually. And of course, in addition to that, you have the access to the live sessions. We only communicate live sessions, date, time, and the access link in the leadership letter. Nowhere else this is available. So I'm looking forward to seeing you there. The next live session is coming very soon. And in live sessions, you can answer absolutely any question you have. And of course, feel free to connect with me on social media, connect with me on LinkedIn, follow me on Instagram, like my Facebook page, and of course, subscribe to my YouTube channel. And of course, when you're in Germany, I'm also on Xing if you know that platform. So feel free to engage with me there. And on LinkedIn, connect with me properly. Don't do the follow thing. Just connect with me properly. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you on all channels. The most important aspect, however, is always the last one, which I say. Apply what you heard, because only when you apply what you heard, you will see the positive aspects that you obviously want to see in your organization. I wish you all the best doing so. If you have any kind of questions, feel free to contact me anytime. I'm answering every single measure within 24 hours or less, so I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And at the end of this video cast, as well as at the end of this podcast, there's only one thing left for me to say. Thank you very much for your time.